Sometimes life is wonderful, and sometimes it's not. Cherish the good, but always be prepared for life's challenges. At Private Healthcare, we provide the peace of mind you deserve. With Private Healthcare, you'll get the coverage you want and healthcare you need. If your employer doesn't supply healthcare coverage and you don't qualify for Medicare or Medicaid, you need to give us a call right now. Private Healthcare is private health insurance for ages 65 and under with medical, dental, vision, and even prescription coverage. When life comes at you unexpectedly, you need to be ready. And health insurance is your financial safety net. Health insurance has never been so easy and affordable. If you're looking for health coverage at the best price and your annual household income is $35,000 or more, give us a call at 800-733-6860. 800-733-6860.
Welcome to the Turnpike Sports Spotlight. Dave Weishottle with you. How does one become successful in the sports betting and gaming industry? Well, one big way is to be compliant with the various rules and regulations of the different jurisdictions. It's kind of difficult because the right thing changes from state to state. I think one of the best companies out there in guiding operators in this business is Vixio Regulatory Intelligence. As a gaming lawyer, I read everything they put out because usually they make me sound a lot smarter than I probably am. And recently, Vixio released a regulatory intelligence report on the U.S. sports betting outlook. And to tell us all about the report and all about Vixio, on the line we have James Kilsby, Gambling Compliance and Regulation Analyst from Vixio. James, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dave. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you. And certainly everyone who works in the gaming industry or is interested in the gaming industry has heard about Vixio. But for people out there who are not in the gambling industry who are listening right now, tell us about Vixio and what its role in the gaming industry, not only here in the United States, but also worldwide.
Right, so Vixio Regulatory Intelligence is a RegTech provider that takes the heavy lifting out of monitoring complex regulatory developments across highly regulated industries, specifically the global gaming industry and the global payments industry. Vixio has been an established presence on the gambling market for over 15 years now, more like 17 years. And we, through our platform, we provide users with daily intelligence reports on regulatory changes and compliance challenges. We have an extensive set of reports that clearly outline which forms of gambling are legal in which jurisdictions worldwide, not just state to state across the US, but globally. And then we also provide market data for gambling jurisdictions worldwide. So what we really do is we give a 360-degree view of the regulated gambling market, both from how the legal frameworks, and as you say, are very different, how they stand today, but also give insight into how policy developments are formulating in different parts of the world.
Now, you mentioned reports, and recently Vixio released a report, the U.S. Sports Betting Outlook, and we're going to get into some of the specifics, but I first want to know, what was the scope of the report, and what was the goal and purpose of putting out this report?
So Vixio first produced a US Sports Betting Outlook report prior to the PASPA ruling of May 2018. And the US Sports Betting Outlook is a monthly report that consolidates the latest market data, Vixio's forecast for how big we expect the market to grow. And it also includes perspectives on policy changes, recent events, and published market data. So in a very condensed form, our clients and readers of the US Sports Betting Outlook can fundamentally get a sense of where the US sports betting market stands today, what are key threats, opportunities, challenges that are emerging, and how are trends in market performance varying state to state and company company, operator by operator.
Now, you mentioned PASPA, and since 2018, the sports betting industry has really expanded at an incredible rate. It was just amazing to watch. Now, according to the recent report, which was released by Vixio, what does Vixio forecast the sports betting market to be worth, and what does that amount tell you about the growth of the sports betting industry since PASPA was repealed in 2018?
You're exactly right. The growth of the US sports betting market has been just extraordinary. So Vixio, we first produced a forecast for the US market prior to that ruling, and ultimately, and we're not alone in this, right? Flutter, I think, gave similar commentary just a few weeks ago.
Sure.
The US sports betting market is more than twice as big as, frankly, we would ever have imagined it to be at, rolling back 6+ years to before the Supreme Court ruling. So I think it has been an extraordinary growth story that has exceeded all expectations at that high level of reported revenue by state. Maybe coming back to some of the factors that have gone into that outperformance relative to the initial expectations. But to answer your question, Vixio forecasts the market in actually two different ways. We publish a base case forecast and a bull case forecast, and that is because, as you know, how big the US market will be very much depends on participation by the number of states that will legalize. So our current base case forecast, which is much more conservative in terms of future states legalizing sports betting. The map is quite well filled in now in any case, but on the assumption that only a handful of states will legalize over the next couple of years, we forecast that the mobile sports betting market, which we anticipate to be around about $14.4 billion in gross revenue in 2024.
Wow.
We expect that will grow to $24.2 billion in our base case forecast by 2028. So very significant growth to come. But that doesn't include accounting for potential legalization in Texas, where it's possible we'll see Texas legalize sports wagering next year, but not necessarily probable. So if you factor in Texas and maybe Georgia, again, would be a big market, may or may not legalize over the next few years. Then if we think of more of a bull case scenario, we forecast for the market to be worth $27.8 billion in top line gross revenue by 2028. So an enormous market by any measure, and way eclipsing any other sports betting market, any other legal and regulated sports betting market globally.
The industry is incredible, and it's ever changing. It's evolving as we speak. And one thing sports betting operators have to deal with is the state rules and regulations. And part of that is dealing with taxes. There are some states that are discussing changing taxes when it comes to the sports betting industry. I'm sitting in one right now in New Jersey. When it comes to taxes, what should the sports betting industry expect? Do you see big changes with regard to that in the future? Do you see more regulations with regard to taxation? Where do you see that going?
Yeah, actually just moderated a panel on this at G2E just a couple of weeks ago in Vegas, specifically on this topic of tax policy in US sports betting, which is actually a more interesting topic than it sounds on paper. For different reasons, but
that could be a whole show by itself, by the way.
Yeah, no, that it absolutely could. But this has obviously been in the news, got a lot of headlines this year, in large part because of the changes that were enacted in Illinois' state budget.
Yeah,
Illinois is the sort of jostles with New Jersey for being the second/third largest online sports betting market, obviously behind New York. So it's a major market, and as you know, but and many listeners will know as well. Basically, the Illinois budget this year increased the tax rate on sports betting revenue from 15% to a sort of graduated structure that is 20% at the low end, but 40% at the high end. So went from 15% to up to 40% in the budget. That followed after Ohio, also as part of the state budget bill in 2023, doubled its tax rate from 10% to 20%. So what we have seen is two major states have very materially increased their tax rates now over the course of the past 15 or so months. So this is a live topic of conversation and a significant challenge for operators in the industry and of concern to Wall Street, right? The tax rate directly affects the margins and profitabilities of these companies. So fundamentally, this is a conversation that will continue, and I do believe that more states will consider increasing their tax rates on sports betting. There's various reasons for that. One is New York is absolutely raking in tax dollars as a result of its 51% tax rate. The industry obviously has criticised and continues to push back against that model, but it's undeniably been extraordinarily successful from a state budget perspective in New York. So that has, I think, planted the seeds for some states to reconsider their own rates. So that's one factor. Secondly, state budgets is states, frankly, at different times in different budget cycles are looking for new revenues, and sports betting and gambling in general is one option that they turn to. So to the extent that federal stimulus funds on COVID have either run out or are running out, and states are looking for new sources of revenue, it's natural that they look for ways to increase taxes that don't involve, across the board income tax increases that are much less politically palatable. So it's not unusual for this to be on the agenda generally. And then thirdly, I think it's fair to say the industry was actually pretty successful. New York and Pennsylvania and a few other markets aside, in the early days of that post-PASPA period, the industry was very successful in advocating for quite low tax rates, relatively low tax rates, on the basis that sports betting was a low-margin product. The typical hold in Nevada pre-PASPA had been 5% or thereabouts, and operators generally, on an aggregated basis, report much higher margins. New York and other states are setting higher tax rates. So it's not a surprise that some states that did set tax rates of 10% or less may consider reevaluating that and increasing them. So ultimately, I think this is something that is going to be considered in other states beyond Illinois and Ohio that have already enacted changes. But it's definitely an area where this is something that Vixio has outlined in past editions of our Sports Betting Outlook. It's an area where there will be more noise than actual substance. You mentioned New Jersey. It's a different animal to have one state senator that is proposing a bill to increase the tax rate versus a governor proposing it as part of a budget package. So I think this is going to be something that requires buy-in from high levels. And just because we see bills or budget amendments proposed by one or a small handful of lawmakers doesn't mean that tax changes are going to happen. But it's something that is definitely a risk factor for the industry going forward.
Taxes are such a huge issue, and it's compounded this year because in the U.S. it's an election year. How much of an impact will this election have on the sports betting industry and the gambling industry as far as taxes and other issues as well? I mean, will this upcoming election impact the industry in a significant way?
I don't think it would, frankly, from a industry-specific standpoint. Obviously, the presidential election is going to have a massive impact on, economic sentiment and corporate taxes and other policies that will apply to businesses across the board. So there will clearly be an impact on the industry from that. But in terms of specific policy directions for the sports betting and the gaming industry, I don't anticipate there'll be a tremendous impact based on who wins the presidential election race, or even really which party controls Congress. If you think about, needless to say, that the gaming industry and the sports betting industry is generally regulated state by state.
Yeah.
And federal influence is limited. So I don't think that will. It doesn't make such a big difference.
Yeah.
Which party controls power in Congress or controls the White House. Handful of exceptions to that. If I think about the difference between the first Trump administration and the current Biden administration, there was the Trump administration did make moves that were very much anti-online gambling through how it wanted to interpret the Federal Wire Act. I think that was probably a moment in time, and the ship has sailed with that, partly due to favourable court rulings for the industry.
Yeah.
The growth of the industry, putting the genie back in the bottle now, will be very, very difficult. And there's a few other political factors that would make it a surprise if that came back on the agenda. So really, I think an area you're talking about where there could be impact is for tribal gaming, which is subject to a layer of federal regulation. Generally, the current Biden administration has been pro-tribes with some of its policies around allowing online sports wagering within compacts being the most notable. But again, I think there'll be a limited impact on the sports betting industry at the federal level. And there are certainly local, state level elections that will have a local impact on certain things. So the prospects of Minnesota legalizing sports wagering in 2025 might be determined by a Senate race in Minnesota, for example. But sports betting and gaming is less affected by November 5th elections than many others, that's for sure.
Well, let me ask you about some federal legislation. As you said, generally gambling rules and regulations are handled by the states, but a federal piece of legislation that was introduced by Democrat from Connecticut, Richard Blumenthal, and Democrat from New York, Paul Tonko, it's called the Safe Bet Act. I know the report covers that a little bit. If this passes, what restrictions would it place on sports betting operators? And does it have a good chance of passing?
So taking the first question first,
sure.
The Safe Bet Act is a new piece of legislation introduced in the U.S. House of Representatives by Paul Tonko of New York, as you referenced, and in the Senate by Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. The bill would actually outlaw. Establish a federal prohibition on sports betting, and the only way that states could exempt themselves from that prohibition would be submitting an application to the U.S. Attorney General to demonstrate that their regulatory regimes meet newly defined federal minimum standards. So basically, what it would mean would be that all states with sports betting would have to update their regulations to comply with new federal mandates, and those federal mandates are pretty enormously impactful and almost unique on a global scale, let alone totally game changing in the US. So, for example, advertising would have to be prohibited, I think, between the hours of 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. So you'd no longer be able to advertise see adverts during the day for sports betting. And the bill would also impose so-called affordability checks for customers. So any player that sought to deposit more than $1,000 within a 24-hour period or $10,000 within 30 days would have to undergo a check by the operator to be reassured that they can afford to spend that type of those type of funds on sports betting. The UK and Netherlands and a couple of other markets have also introduced affordability type measures, but this would be much more directly imposing and restrictive on the industry if that was adopted. And so there are other standards as well, but in a nutshell, the federal bill, the Safe Bet Act, looks to severely restrict advertising of sports betting and introduce very much stricter responsible gambling standards, and the states would have to update their laws to abide by them if they wanted to keep their regimes for sports betting.
You know, speaking of restrictions, I have an office in New Jersey, but I also have an office in Massachusetts. And recently, the Massachusetts Gaming Commission startled me when they made some news when they started talking about wagering limits on individual players. Is that something that the sports betting industry will have to contend with in the future? And does this prompt other states to take a closer look at this issue about limiting wagers?
So I think what Massachusetts is looking at is the first state to at least publicly look into the issue that many larger bettors, sophisticated bettors, sharps, if you can call them that, are quite vociferous in their complaints that they are severely limited in the amount they can bet on major sports betting platforms. And Massachusetts is the first state to look into how and why operators limit winning customers. And they are, I'd say, looking at this with two perspectives. The idea of limiting. One is, are operators justified in limiting the amount that winning players can bet? And then secondly, how are operators limiting players from a responsible gambling point of view? So there's sort of a two-sided issue really when it comes to limiting on both of those areas. Massachusetts is the first state to look at it. It's not necessarily a surprise that Massachusetts is the state that where this has come up first. Massachusetts is a very progressive regulator, got quite sophisticated rules already, partly on advertising, but certain areas like data privacy protections. And frankly, on a relative basis compared to other states, Massachusetts is a state very much that set a high bar in terms of compliance and regulation, and it's shown a propensity to want to explore alternative ways of doing things. So it's not a surprise that Massachusetts is looking at this. What we don't know is whether Massachusetts will move past a phase of discovery and learning about this area and actually propose regulations that might set new rules for how operators can limit their players. Maybe on both those grounds, right? Limiting their ability to limit winning players, while maybe imposing stricter rules in terms of limiting of higher volume players from a responsible gambling perspective. We don't know. This could be something that the industry has to address, maybe Massachusetts specifically, and then whether it would spread beyond that. It's a risk factor that companies have disclosed previously, but it's not something that is tremendously advanced as a conversation at this point in time.
I want to ask you about another state. The Colorado Division of Gaming removed the wagers that they deemed to be negative wagers. By the way, that always sounds like something Massachusetts would have done, by the way. What are negative wagers, and why should operators in other states need to be aware of the actions from the Colorado Division of Gaming Enforcement? Is this an issue that this is something I've never thought about before, but is this a big issue about negative wagers in other states too?
So a negative wager is where the outcome of the bet is determined not by, an individual player hitting a home run or achieving something. Yeah. It's by a player not underperforming, I guess. Yeah. So on its face, there are questions of integrity around a negative wager because the outcome can be determined by potentially one player underperforming relative to what the line is set at. You in theory, you could have wagers that are determined by a player deciding to not operate at their highest level. Therefore sort of manipulate a betting market that way. We've seen this to some extent, so there is concern, obviously, around the John Tay Porter issue that has raised a similar issue around the range of bets that are available, and should be available. The NBA, along with operators who are partnered with the NBA, have taken some steps to limit the types of bets that certain basketball players can be involved in. So I think fundamentally this comes to questions of integrity and a broader issue as to how wide-ranging should the types of bets that are available be in different states. Colorado, I think, has looked at this. They've told Vixio directly this was not their removing of negative wagers from their permitted bets catalogue was not driven by pushback from sports leagues. It was not directly driven by the Jonte Porter scandal, and was somewhat more of a housekeeping item. But it does speak to the fact that regulators are alive to tightening up the types of permitted bets that may be offered in their jurisdictions. And I think that's largely to remove things at the margins that could present concerns of integrity or perceived concerns of integrity, rather than it sort of necessarily being a move to really constrain available bet types.
As a gaming attorney and a host of this show, I'm constantly talking with sports betting operators, and they tell me about their new AI products or what they're doing in terms of customization for their customers. And one of the real challenges the operators face is creating new products and developing tech and new innovations while also adhering to the rules and regulations of a jurisdiction. How does Vixio help with these operators' concerns when it comes to innovation and following the regulations of a state or a jurisdiction?
So you're exactly right. No two states or no two jurisdictions are the same when it comes to regulations and compliance. So this is a real challenge for the industry to innovate, because a product that is built for one market may not necessarily be meet the regulatory requirements of another. So a lot of what operators and just as much as operators, their sort of technology providers do is have to benchmark different jurisdictions in terms of what specific product features or specific requirements the regulations of each jurisdiction has. So they need to make sure they're constantly doing research to be sure that their products are fit for purpose from a regulatory perspective, not just for one market, but across any of the markets they're currently in, but also ones that are looking for the future. So what Vixio does is gives very, very easy ways for operators and lawyers and other advisors and stakeholders of the industry to not have to comb through pages and pages and pages of regulations in different states and somehow find the ways of comparing them. Yeah. We have the ability for our clients to find, okay, I need to compare what the rules are on voided bets across New Jersey and Colorado and Pennsylvania and New York, and you can pull up an easy way of visualizing that, so you can clearly see what's allowed where and map out product development accordingly.
Yeah, I know. I just heard that Vixio recently released a technical compliance tool, and that is certainly a big concern and a real challenge for the operators in the sports betting industry that I've talked to. How does this help the operators? How do you interact with the operators to help them with these issues?
Yeah, so we launched our technical compliance tool last month in September. That is geared actually towards more iGaming, online casino offerings, where the online casino industry shares all of the challenges of technical compliance with the sports betting industry, but then has more on top of that, because the rules that apply to specific types of games that can be allowed in different jurisdictions, sit on top of more general requirements that apply both to casino and sports betting. So our new tool allows takes what I've just spoken about really, but at a much more granular level, where operators and suppliers can immediately retrieve the specific requirements that apply to all areas of online casino games across more than 24 markets globally, and retrieve the specific language and requirements at the click of a button instead of having to pull up, constantly going across multiple tabs at one time or navigating outdated regulator websites to find the information they need.
Now, we've talked about expansion a lot in different states, but one thing I've been fascinated about and one thing I've been hearing about from different people and doing interviews is the expansion of what's happening in Brazil. And I know you know Brazil very well.
Yeah.
What is the state of sports betting and gaming in Brazil, and what can we look forward to in the near future in Brazil? Because what I'm seeing down there is just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, but so Brazil is absolutely I think it's fair to say, the center of attention for the global online gambling industry for 2024. Brazil is a highly, highly prohibitive gambling market and has basically had, with some limited exceptions for like a national lottery and a small amount of horse racing, fundamentally had no regulated or legal gaming since the 1940s, which is a crazy thing to think about for a country of Brazil's size and sophistication. But Brazil's Congress passed a law in December of 2023 to establish a licensing framework for all forms of online gambling, so sports betting and iGaming. And the story of 2024 has been the Brazilian government implementing that law by adopting regulations, opening up a licensing process, and ultimately accepting applications from companies that will be eligible to be licensed and offer online gambling legally in Brazil starting from January the 1st, 2025. Brazil is a country of, we spoke about how big the US market is with its 300 million plus population.
Yeah.
Brazil's not quite as big, obviously not quite as wealthy from a sort of GDP perspective. But, this is a country of 210 million people, soccer mad, actually has for all that online gambling is illegal, or I should say unregulated, has a pretty sophisticated, increasingly sophisticated offshore market where companies have been offering unregulated online gambling in Brazil for the past several years now. So has quite a big grey market. And ultimately, we think this is an opportunity that will be a market worth at least $5 billion in annual revenue by the fifth year. Very much alongside the biggest US markets and Ontario, and edging towards sort of the size of the UK in terms of being a major market opportunity that is emerging for the industry.
Another trend that I've heard a lot of people talk about in the industry and even come on the show to talk about is the expansion of online casinos in different states. I mean, we've had politicians and we've had sports betting operators come on and say one thing that helps the argument to allow online casinos is that we have sports betting and we have learned how to draft proper regulation, and we found out how to be compliant with the rules and regulations, which will in turn allow us to be compliant with the rules set up for online casinos. To me, it kind of sounds like a simplification of why states will have no problem being compliant with rules. But I want to hear from you, since you're a gambling compliance and regulation analyst. How different are the regulations and the compliance issues with regard to sports betting versus online casinos? And do you think more and more states will jump on board the online casino wagon in the next 2 or 3 years?
So from a regulatory point of view, the challenges are not too dissimilar. And if you think about there is complexity when it comes to the specifics of, bringing product to market, etc. But from a kind of a policy objective point of view, which is what state governments care about, the challenges are fundamentally the same, right? The US states have proven, I think, with a high degree of success that platforms are secure, geolocation works, blocking of underage play can fundamentally be achieved. There are, there's a reliance on patrons themselves around that. But fundamentally, this is an industry that is proven to be successful from a regulatory point of view. in terms of those threshold controls. And the same challenges apply for online casino. Really, can you prevent underage play? Are there sort of sufficient ways of reducing or mitigating fraud and anti-money laundering, et cetera, et cetera? There's no real difference between online casino platforms and sports betting in that sense. So I do think that on that one level, you would anticipate that the case for online casino would be strong because states have proven out regulation for sports betting, and the revenue potential and more importantly, the tax revenue potential from online casino is significantly larger than it is from sports betting. Pennsylvania, Michigan, New Jersey are yielding multiple times more in annual tax revenue from iGaming than they are from mobile sports betting.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no reason to think that wouldn't be the case in other states as well. So you would have, from that perspective of to how sports betting should have set up the US market for greater expansion of online casino games. You would have thought that the case would be strong and states would be moving forward with, expanding their current online markets limited to sports betting by adding iGaming as well. So really the factors, coming to your second question, we do not anticipate, despite that, we're not anticipating a large number of states to legalize iGaming over the course of the next 4 to 5 years. There'll be states that continue to consider it, like Illinois and New York and Maryland and maybe Louisiana and Wyoming, among others. But there's no state currently today that I and Vixio thinks about for 2025 and can point to and say, that is a banker to legalize iGaming, in 2025, 2026. The obstacles to states legalizing iGaming, it's not really about what we mentioned about regulation. It's much more around other objections, policy objections that are either around sort of responsible gambling and whether states are fundamentally comfortable with the notion of casino games being played on mobile phones, but then also around cannibalization of land-based gaming and concerns of certain casino companies and casino union groups around what the impact of iGaming would be on what are pretty large businesses already that employ a lot of people. So I think the sort of slow crawl towards iGaming expansion really is not about regulation. It's about other policy issues.
As far as expansion is concerned, especially in the sports betting industry, is Missouri, do you think, the next state to possibly allow sports betting? I know there's a ballot measure in the upcoming election. What are the chances of that passing? And if it does pass in Missouri, is there sports betting in Missouri in 2025, or are there some more hurdles to overcome?
So this is actually, it's an interesting one because we started our conversation off about how quickly sports betting has spread across the US, and it was really quite extraordinary. I mean, I think you had 8 or 9 states legalize in 2019. 2020, as we all know, was a very strange year, and then you had another 9 legalize in 2021. But what we've seen sort of since that time, the pace of expansion has slowed down. So I think you had maybe 3 states legalized, 22 and 2023, and no state to date in 2024 has passed a law to authorize sports betting. North Carolina and I think Vermont have launched operations, but those are based on past laws, not those from this year. So what we're looking at is Missouri on November 5th through its referendum is the last chance for the US sports betting industry to avoid a shutout year when no new states legalize. And that would be the first time not only since the PASPA ruling, I guess the first time since 2016, I think, that no state has legalized sports wagering, because Pennsylvania did so preemptively before the Supreme Court ruling in 2017. So It's Missouri or bust in terms of market expansion for 2024. The referendum on November 5th will determine whether a ballot measure is approved to legalise retail sportsbooks at major sports arenas and land-based casinos in Missouri, and then also statewide mobile sports wagering. Ultimately, how likely is that to happen? It really feels 2 weeks out like it's a pretty much 50-50 coin flip outcome. Polling has sort of shown just about majority support for sports betting, but with a lot of undecided voters. And there is one casino operator in Missouri, Caesars Entertainment. This is no secret. They are opposed to the initiative, not because they're opposed to sports betting, but because of the specific language and how it would disfavor land-based casino operators in Missouri relative to a certain two large-scale mobile-first sports betting operators who would be able to obtain their own licenses and really have quite a favourable leg up. So I think a general rule of referendums on gaming and sports betting included is there is a segment of the population that is opposed to legal gambling, so they're always going to vote against it. Any referendum, whether it's an organised, funded opposition campaign against, is probably always going to be quite close. So I think that's what we're seeing in Missouri in 2024, and we didn't see it in Louisiana and Maryland and South Dakota a few years ago. California's in totally other different beast, but Missouri is going to be a close one.
Now, when it comes to regulations and compliance, one issue that the gaming industry is dealing with right now is sweepstakes and certain fantasy sports sites. A lot of officials in states see these almost as prop bets that should fall under the sports betting regulations of their state. How do you see that issue shaping up? Are we going to have some new rules and regulations with regard to these sites? Will these operators have to deal with compliance issues that, look, they haven't dealt with in the past? So are you going to see a lot of movement in this issue in the sports betting industry?
Sweepstakes specifically is, I think, very much the hot topic of the moment and likely to remain so for 2025. That is a segment of the market that has grown astronomically over the course of the past 3 or 4 years, but snuck under the radar until maybe 12 or so months ago. And has now really sort of got on the front burner as far as the regulated industry is concerned. So I do think I don't think we have quite time to go into this, and I'm mindful that you're a lawyer yourself. The legalities of DFS and DFS Plus or other types of fantasy sports and sweepstakes and social casinos, they're all different. They're all underpinned by somewhat different laws and legal interpretations. So it is important, not necessary, to paint all these things with the same brush.
Yeah.
But I think what and also these are always invariably state specific issues, right? Different states have different laws, different definitions of what gambling is or isn't in a given state. And you already see sweepstakes providers not offer, not serving certain states on that basis. So I do think this would probably evolve on a state by state basis, and I think fundamentally we're just going to see the spotlight shining much more on sweepstakes, and the temperature is going to be turned up much more on that segment of the industry, and it's certainly being turned up by the industry, the gaming industry. So those licensed and regulated online sports betting and online casino and land-based casino operators that are not participating in the market, absolutely pressuring through the media and through other channels to have regulators and other law enforcement bodies take a closer look at that segment. So I think we'll see more of that continue. And this is going to be a conversation that comes much more, goes up the food chain. Outcomes hard to call, and also again state specific. Another place we're absolutely seeing it, and there's almost daily news developments on currently is litigation.
Yeah,
litigation is there. We're seeing a lot of class action lawsuits filed against actually not just sweepstakes, but some fantasy sites and traditional social casinos, if that's not a conflicting term to describe them by. But there's a lot more litigation in this area where individual plaintiffs are challenging the legality of these different unregulated gaming offerings, and that's also going to continue. So both on that sort of litigation side and the lobbying and pressure side, we're going to be hearing a lot more about this over the course of the next 12 months at least.
These sites should be contacting Vixio immediately. So, and on that vein, James, we're running out of time, but can you give out a website for Vixio so people can find out more about it?
For those who listeners not familiar with Vixio, please do visit our website, vixio.com/research. There you'll be able to download a copy of the recent US sports betting outlook report that we've spoken about. And you can also find us on LinkedIn and on X, and follow along there for more.
James Kilsby, Gambling Compliance and Regulation Analyst from Vixio Regulatory Intelligence. Thank you so much for coming on and telling us all about Vixio and the great U.S. Sports Betting Outlook report that was just released by Vixio. Vixio is an incredible organization with state-of-the-art tools to help companies and operators in the sports betting and gambling industry. So please come back on and keep us updated about what Vixio is doing for the gambling industry, because it's always exciting and it's always important. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Pleasure to join you.
That'll do it for us this week. We'll see you next time on the Turnpike.